been wanting to do this video for a long time for people that don't feel like they quite know what to do in the kitchen yet and don't really have anybody to teach them how to do it. So we're going to go over the different measuring cups today and measuring spoons, and then also show you how to put them into practical use. So here is a liquid measuring cup, and they usually have a spout on them. And so this one, you have to be careful because this one, if you use cup measurements and not the metric, this one goes to 2.5 cups. And so I have to remind myself every single time that I need 2 cups of liquid, not to go all the way to the top. So this would be for water or broth or milk or juice that you're measuring to put into a recipe. These are dry cup measurements. So you have 1 cup, a 1/2 cup, a 1/3 cup, and a 1/4 cup. And these are to measure dry ingredients like flour and sugar, brown sugar, nuts, these are your tablespoon. This is the tablespoon, a teaspoon, a 1/2 teaspoon right here, and a 1/4 teaspoon. If you need an 1/8 teaspoon, just do a 1/2 of the 1/4 teaspoon. If you've got a recipe that calls for 2 teaspoons of salt, and you are going to double that recipe, 3 teaspoons equal a tablespoon. So if you're doubling, then you could put a tablespoon and 1 teaspoon in. We'll also talk a little bit about, I also wanted to talk a little bit about doubling measurements. If you had a recipe that called for 3/4 cup of flour, and you were going to make that recipe 2 times, so you were going to double that recipe, how much flour would you then put in? You'd put 1.5 cups. So if you're unsure about your ability to double measurements and you're doubling a recipe, then just measure it out twice. And just measure the 3/4 cup with your 1/2 cup and your 1/4 cup, which equals 3/4 cup. Just do that 2 times. So this is a stick of butter, and for what I'm going to use today, I'm going to use unsalted butter. But if you look on the package of the butter, on the wrapper, it will tell you the tablespoons. So if you're making a recipe that called for 2 tablespoons of butter, then all you have to do is get a sharp knife, or even a butter knife, a table knife, and cut at the 2 tablespoon mark. So a stick of butter is 8 tablespoons, equals 8 tablespoons of butter. This is unsalted butter, And mostly when you're making sweets, desserts, pastries, cookies, you want to use unsalted butter. And it will say it on the package. Here's a regular package of butter and it says that it's salted. Well, this says unsalted on it. If you don't have unsalted butter, you don't have to get worried that it's not going to turn out. Just when you make your recipe, like if you're making cookies, don't put as much salt in it as it calls for, and it will turn out just fine. So to show you how to practically use these measurements, we're going to go ahead and make some chocolate chip cookies, and I am just going to follow the recipe that's on the back of the Great Value brand of chocolate chips. So for this recipe we need all-purpose flour, some baking soda, some salt, some vanilla, some sugar, brown sugar, a cup of unsalted butter, which is 2 sticks, one stick of butter is a half a cup, and 2 eggs, some chocolate chips. I like to use milk chocolate, but you can use semi-sweet, and some cooking spray. Go ahead and have an adult, if you're not an adult, or if you're not allowed to use the oven, have an adult set the oven to 375 degrees. And it's always a good idea to ask a parent or a babysitter first if it's okay if you cook. And you need to remember that if you cook, you're responsible for cleaning up afterwards. You can't just go in and make a mess in the kitchen and then just leave it. You have to clean up. So you need to get a big bowl and a spoon to mix. This butter is soft because it's been on my counter all morning. And it's very warm right now where I live. And it's going to get even hotter. So, 1 cup of butter, which is 2 sticks of butter. If you don't have butter, you could use shortening if you wanted to. Okay, the recipe now calls for 3/4 of a cup of white sugar, granulated sugar. Now, there's not a measurement in the dry measurements that is a 3/4 of a cup. At least I don't have one. So we're going to use the 1/2 cup and the 1/4 cup. 1/2 cup and a 1/4 cup. If you remember from your fractions, a 1/2 cup, 1/2 and a 1/4 equals 3/4. So we're just going to make sure that that's level with the top and put that in our bowl. And the 1/4 cup, make sure that's level with the top and put it in our bowl. It also calls for 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. And brown sugar is like kind of wet, kind of molds to whatever you put it in, and you need to pack this in your measuring cup just with a spoon. Just press down on it. And then see, when you put it in your bowl, it's like building a sandcastle kind of. It will come out in a chunk like that. Okay, that was a 1/2 cup. Now we're putting our 1/4 cup in there to equal 3/4 of a cup. You need to make sure that brown sugar is in a container that's airtight, either like a Tupperware or Rubbermaid, or a plastic bag that you can seal up, or it will go dry. And there's our 1/4 cup. That equals 3/4 of a cup. Okay, we're going to go ahead and, if you have a hand mixer or a stand mixer, go ahead and mix those up right now. But if you just have a bowl and a spoon, it works just as well. See how that's all mixed? Next we're going to put our eggs in. And it's always a good idea to crack the eggs first into a little bowl and then put them in your big mixing bowl. You don't always do this, but if some shell gets into the egg, then it's easier to pull it out from a little bowl than in with all the ingredients. Okay, go ahead and add those eggs. And go ahead and mix that together. Okay, see how that looks? I'm going to go ahead and add my vanilla now. And that calls for 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So here I've got my 1 teaspoon measure. And you might want to do this over a different bowl if you're unsure of how steady your hand is. But just measure out 1 teaspoon and put that in. I'm wiping the vanilla out of the teaspoon measure so that the next ingredients that I measure won't stick to the teaspoon. Okay, the recipe said to put the dry ingredients in a different bowl and mix them up. But I never do that. So we need our baking soda next. And go ahead and put your 1 teaspoon. And then see how that cardboard is there? I usually just level it off with that, and then sprinkle it in. We also need 1 teaspoon of salt. And remember I said if you're using salted butter, I would only put half of the salt in or no salt in. So that called for 1 teaspoon of salt. I didn't level that one off though. Go ahead and mix that all in if you want. The last ingredient I'm going to put in is our flour. And we're going to need the cup measurement for this. Calls for 2 1/4 cup. So what I like to do is kind of fluff the flour up and then spoon it into the cup measurement. And then you take the straight edge to a dinner knife and then just level it off like that. So that's 1 cup. If you just dipped it in like this, it might make it too compact and it might be more flour than you need in your recipe. Okay, so they teach in home economics class to do this. So that's the 2nd cup of flour going in. And then we need our quarter measure. Guess I had those upside down when I was showing you the Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mix this up now. If we were doubling this recipe, how much flour would we put in? Instead of 2 1/4 cups of flour, how much would we put in? We put 4 1/2 cups. How much baking soda would we put in? We put a teaspoon of baking soda. So if we were doubling this recipe, how much would we put in? We put 2 teaspoons of baking soda and 2 teaspoons of salt and 2 teaspoons of vanilla. That called for 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar and 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. So how much of each of those sugars would we put in if we were doubling the recipe? We'd put 1.5 cups. And instead of 2 eggs, how many eggs would we put in? We put 4 eggs. Okay, that's pretty well mixed, and you can see it didn't take hardly any time at all. Okay, the recipe calls for I usually just dump the chocolate chips in. But the recipe calls for 1 package, 11 ounce and a half package of chocolate chips, which is the size of this package. So just take a scissors and cut it open and dump that all in there. If you like walnuts or pecans or any other kind of nut in your cookies, you can put that in also. These are going to be chocolatey. They're going to have a lot of chocolate chips in them. Okay, the recipe says that we don't have to grease our cookie sheets. And there's enough butter in them that you wouldn't need to, but I sometimes do anyway, just so they don't stick. Now I've got this small ice cream scoop. It's for cookies. And so I just fill it like that and put it on there. But if you don't have one of those, you just take 2 spoons and fill it like that, and take the other spoon to release it. So you can go 3 across and 4 down, and that gives you 12 cookies, which is a dozen. 12 of anything: donuts, rolls, cookies, is a dozen. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the oven for 8 to 10 minutes or until golden. Your baking rack will need to be in the middle, but you need to have somebody help you do that, because you'll probably remember it needs to be in the middle when it's hot. So get an adult to help you. Okay, put them in the oven. And set your timer to 8 minutes, and then we'll check it. Okay, while those are in the oven, put all the ingredients away and do what you can to clean up. And if you have some baking racks, take those out now. Put the cooling racks onto a clean counter or table. If you don't have cooling racks, you can use paper towels. When the timer goes off, be sure to use a hot pad or an oven mitt to take the hot pan out of the oven, or have somebody help you do it. These are a lot different than the chocolate chip cookies that I usually do, and I will put the link to that video in the description box if you want to try those instead of these. These look good. They're just a different kind of cookie than what I've been used to. The pan will be hot, so you need to use an oven mitt or a pot holder. And these kind of stuck together. They kind of had them too close and they kind of spread out, so. I'm glad that I sprayed the pan with that cooking spray, because these are kind of sticking. So you take them off when they're still a little bit warm. Otherwise they'll go crisp and they're going to be a lot harder to get off the pan. We'll let those cool, and I have the other pan in the oven. I'm just making room here on the cooling rack for the last pan of cookies once they come out of the oven. Once they get cool, you can stack them. I was worried about these cookies being so flat. If you wanted to add just a tiny bit more flour to the dough when you mix them up, you could. But it certainly didn't stop my husband from eating a whole bunch of them. This recipe made 36 cookies, which is 3 dozen. Thanks for joining me for learning how to measure flour and baking soda and vanilla. I hope you try making something, whether it's cookies, whether it's this recipe or something else. And thanks for watching. Remember to always clean up after you're done in the kitchen. Thanks for watching. Bye.